Sailing down my dirty stream, still I love it, and I'll keep the dream that someday, though maybe not this year, my Hudson River will once again run clear.
Rivers define us in many ways. They define our culture. They define who we are, the people who live in the Hudson Valley. We're different than people who live anywhere else in our country, and it's a lot because of the history of the Hudson. We have on the Hudson one of the oldest commercial fisheries in North America. It's 350 years old. Many of the people that we represent come from families that have been fishing the river continuously since Dutch colonial times.
But it also, to me, is a place where our community comes together. It's a place that ties the Hudson Valley and New York City and really all New Yorkers.
One of the enclaves of the commercial fishery on the Hudson is a little village called Crotonville, New York. Half the people in Crotonville made their living, or at least some part of it, crabbing or fishing the river. For them, the environment was their backyard. It was the bathing beaches and the swimming holes of the Hudson River. But in 1966, Penn Central Railroad began vomiting oil from a 4.5-foot pipe in the Croton Harmon rail yard. And the oil went up the river on the tides, and it blackened the beaches, and it made the shad taste of diesel, so that they couldn't be sold to the Fulton Fish Market in New York City. The Waterkeeper movement began on the Hudson River when a blue-collar coalition of commercial and recreational fishermen mobilized to reclaim the Hudson from its polluters. These weren't radicals, they weren't militants, they were people whose patriotism was rooted in the bedrock of our country.
They were very, very upset by what had become of their river, by the fact that companies and municipalities were wantonly discharging pollutants into the Hudson without a thought.
And they'd been to the government agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution, to the Corps of Engineers, the Conservation Department, and the Coast Guard, and they were given the bum's rush. And by this evening in March of 1966, virtually everybody in Crotonville had come to the conclusion that government was in cahoots with the polluters. And the only way that they were going to reclaim the river for themselves is if they confronted the polluters directly. And then a guy stood up named Bob Boyle, and he was a great fly fisherman, and he was the outdoor editor of Sports Illustrated magazine. He had come across an ancient navigational statute called the Rivers and Harbors Act. And that statute said that it was illegal to pollute any waterway in the United States. You had to pay a big penalty if you got caught, but also there was a bounty provision that said that anybody who turned in the polluter got to keep half the fine. And that evening, when there were 300 people in that American Legion Hall who stayed there past 1 o'clock in the morning, talking about violence, men and women, he stood up in front of them with a copy of the law and a copy of the memorandum, and he said, you know, we shouldn't be talking about breaking the law. We should be talking about enforcing it. 18 months later, they collected the first bounty in United States history under this 19th century statute. They shut down the Penn Central pipe for good.
They determined to use that money to sue the next polluter and the next polluter and the next polluter until they had stopped every single polluter on the Hudson.
Since that time, we've brought over 400 successful legal actions against Hudson River polluters. We forced polluters on the river to spend over $4.5 billion remediating the Hudson. And today, the Hudson River is an international model for ecosystem protection. This is a waterway that was a national joke in 1966. It was dead water. It turned different colors depending on what colors they were painting the trucks at the GM plant in Tarrytown. Today, it is the richest water body in the North Atlantic.
The Hudson and the progress we've made over the last 40 years in restoring the Hudson have become an international success story.
It's inspired the creation now of Waterkeepers all across North America and indeed across the whole world. We have licensed keepers in Australia and in China. We have a growing movement across Europe. We have dozens of them in Latin America, almost all the major rivers in Canada. And at the annual meeting, we assemble all the keepers from around the world, and they get a chance to network each other, to share their own stories.
Stories of waterkeepers working around the world to control sewage and stormwater runoff, protect our drinking water, and rein in outmoded industries that are poisoning our waterways.
Some of these people are working in total isolation. The Waterkeepers are a really very courageous collection of men and women who've been able to go up against these forces. We do law enforcement, And we do it to restore the value of these waterways so that if you're rich or poor, humble or noble, black or white, you have an absolute right to the waterways. They're not owned by the governor or the legislature. They're owned by all the people. So we force society to take a longer view of building communities that are going to be sustainable and that are going to provide our children with opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health over the long term.